You have 60 seconds to alter your course, or we will be forced to engage. The final warning crackled over the comms, cutting through the Pacific morning like a blade. Beneath the ocean's surface, the most powerful naval fleet in human history adjusted formation, weapon systems primed and waiting. Fingers hovered over triggers that could unleash destruction beyond imagination. Then came a voice, singular, composed, cutting clean through the static like it owned the frequency itself. She spoke, just one call sign. Two words that hadn't been heard in these waters for 5 years. Two words that made time stop, and with that, everything changed. The tension snapped like a broken wire. The ones ready to fire became the ones standing in tribute. The hunters became the honored. The threat became the legend. Who was she? And how can a single word halt an entire fleet in its tracks? What you're about to witness will prove that real authority doesn't come from rank, doesn't come from weapons, doesn't come from the size of your fleet. It comes from respect earned in places no one talks about, in missions that officially never happened. Drop your city name below and stick around for a tale that will redefine everything you think you know about power, authority, and what it really means to command respect. This is the story of Ghost Viper, the woman who could stop the world's most powerful military with just her voice. And today, you'll learn why her legend still echoes through every cockpit in the Navy. Commander Claire Ramsey, 43 years old, with steel gray eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. She once dominated the skies above the Pacific Fleet, like a force of nature. She wasn't just an elite pilot. She was the elite pilot, the one other pilots whispered about in ready rooms. The one whose flight records were sealed behind classification levels that didn't officially exist. They called her Ghost Viper. A name that wasn't chosen, but earned on missions so deeply classified that even mentioning them required presidential authorization. Earned in airspace that didn't appear on any map, fighting enemies that officially didn't exist, saving lives that could never be acknowledged. She was a pilot they called when impossible became necessary, when conventional tactics had failed, when hope was the only thing left, and even hope needed a miracle. She was that miracle, wrapped in titanium and jet fuel, moving to the sky like physics was just a suggestion. But 5 years ago, Ghost Viper vanished. Official records tell a sanitized story, medical retirement following a training mishap. The Pentagon's press release was 3 sentences long. But among those who'd flown beside her, who'd seen her thread an F-22 through mountain passes that satellites couldn't map, the truth was different. Too many impossible assignments. Too many secrets no one person should carry. Too many missions that exist in the space between official policy and desperate necessity. The truth was that Claire Ramsey didn't retire. She was reassigned. Reassigned to missions so black they didn't have names, only numbers. 4 or 5 years, while official records showed her as a civilian consultant, Claire had been flying missions that pushed the boundaries of human endurance and aircraft capability. Solo flights into hostile territory that made her previous impossible assignments look like training exercises. Reconnaissance missions over countries that weren't supposed to know she existed. Extraction operations in places where backup was a luxury no one could afford. She'd flown modified aircraft with no national markings, using call signs that changed with every mission. She landed on abandoned airstrips in deserts that weren't on any map. She carried intelligence that prevented wars most of the world never knew were about to start. The chronic pain was real, accumulated damage from ejections and flights that pushed both pilot and machine beyond design limits. The PTSD was real too, carrying too many secrets, completing too many missions that couldn't be acknowledged, losing too many people whose names could never be spoken aloud. And now she's back. Not by choice, but by necessity. The Pentagon had been tracking a systematic vulnerability in Pacific Fleet air defenses that computer simulations couldn't fully map. They needed someone who knew the systems from the inside, who'd help design the protocols, who could think like both defender and attacker. They needed Ghost Viper. Her official title was Civilian Aerospace Consultant. Her actual mission: conduct unannounced penetration testing of the fleet's most sophisticated air defense network. No advance warning, no file flight plans, no safety nets. Just her, a heavily modified L-39 Albatross that she spent 3 years perfecting, and the same skills that had made her a legend. The L-39 looked like a trainer jet, but appearances were deceiving. enhanced avionics that could fool radar signatures, communications equipment monitoring frequencies that weren't supposed to exist, electronic warfare capabilities that could make a small jet look like anything from a civilian aircraft to a flock of birds. But today, she wasn't using those capabilities. Today was about testing something more fundamental than technology. Today was about testing whether the fleet could still recognize real authority when it spoke. Straight ahead, the USS Liberty materialized through morning haze like a floating city. The Nimitz-class supercarrier was 1,092 feet of American naval power, home to 5,000 sailors and Marines. It was the crown jewel of the Pacific Fleet, and for Claire, it was coming home. The Liberty had been her last official assignment. She'd flown her final acknowledged mission from that deck, a rescue operation that pulled 12 Marines out of what the briefing called an untenable situation. The official after-action report completely failed to capture the reality of threading a damaged helicopter through enemy fire while her wingman provided cover until his fuel ran out. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, 28 years old, 2 kids, husband waiting at home in Norfolk. She'd volunteered to stay behind, to keep drawing fire while Claire completed the extraction. The last thing Claire heard over the radio was Sarah's voice, calm and professional. "Ghost Viper, package is secure. Get them home. I'll see you on the other side." Sarah's name wasn't on any casualty list because the mission never officially happened. But Claire carried her memory like physical weight, along with too many others who'd made similar sacrifices. The first indication something was different came from Petty Officer Rodriguez in the Liberty's radar room. A new blip appeared. Small aircraft, steady course, heading directly for the fleet's defensive perimeter. The approach was too direct, too purposeful. Civilian aircraft usually adjusted course near military exercises. They didn't maintain heading toward the largest naval asset in the Pacific and the Air Operations Center. Commander James Harrison reviewed the contact with growing concern. 15 years of naval aviation had taught him to trust his instincts, and his instincts were screaming. Range now 35 miles, maintaining course and speed, Rodriguez reported. No transponder response to IFF interrogation. Harrison picked up his phone. "Captain, we have an unidentified contact approaching from the southeast." No response to identification requests, maintaining direct approach. Captain David Chun had commanded naval vessels for 20 years. In the current geopolitical climate, every unidentified contact was treated as potential threat until proven otherwise. "Scramble the alert fighters," Chun ordered. Standard intercept protocol. The decision triggered precise choreography across the Liberty. Maintenance crews immediately switched to launch preparation. Pilots Lieutenant Logan Barrett and Lieutenant Amy Foster sprinted toward their F-22 Raptors. Barrett had been flying for 6 years, with over 2,000 flight hours. He was considered one of the Navy's top interceptor pilots. But as he strapped into his F-22, he had no idea he was about to meet the person who'd written the intercept manual he'd memorized. Raptor 1 and Raptor 2, Vector 127, range now 28 miles, came the voice from Liberty Control. Contact appears to be single-engine jet, possibly civilian trainer. Barrett got his first visual on target. Liberty Control, Raptor 1 has visual. Appears to be L-39 Albatross, single-seat configuration. No visible markings. The L-39 was a Czech-built trainer, popular with civilian aerobatic teams. Common enough that seeing one wouldn't normally raise eyebrows, except for flying directly toward a carrier battle group with no flight plan and no radio response. Barrett moved into standard intercept position, slightly above and behind the target, close enough to be visible but maintaining collision avoidance. Foster took opposite wing, giving them complete control of the target's movement options. Unidentified aircraft. This is United States Navy Flight Raptor 1. Barrett transmitted on international emergency frequency. You are approaching restricted military airspace. Identify yourself and alter course to heading 270 immediately. Inside the L-39's cockpit, Claire heard every word with crystal clarity. She studied the 2 F-22s with professional appreciation. The intercept was executed flawlessly. Textbook positioning, appropriate spacing, clear communication. Exactly as she taught during her years as Top Gun instructor. She recognized a voice too. Logan Barrett. She'd reviewed his training records when he'd applied for advanced fighter training. Exceptional pilot, strong tactical awareness, natural leadership. She'd been the one to prove his acceptance. But Barrett didn't know any of that. To him, she was just another civilian who'd wandered into wrong airspace. When 30 seconds passed without response, Barrett tried again, voice carrying more authority. Unidentified aircraft. This is your second warning. You are in violation of restricted airspace. Respond immediately and comply with course change instruction. In the Liberty's Combat Information Center, tension built with each passing second. Specialists tracked the 3 aircraft on high-resolution radar, while communication technicians monitored all frequencies. Any luck raising them on emergency frequencies? Commander Harrison asked. Negative, sir. We've tried guard frequency, international emergency, even civilian aviation channels. Either their radio is broken, or they're choosing not to respond. Captain Chen was running through his options. Every unidentified approach had to be treated as potentially aggressive, but he understood the consequences of mistakenly shooting down civilian aircraft. How long until weapons range? Chen asked. Current closing speed puts us at minimum engagement range in 8 minutes, sir. 8 minutes to determine whether they were dealing with confused civilian reconnaissance probe or something worse. Raptor flight, this is Liberty Actual. Chen's voice came over radio. You are authorized to fire warning shots if target doesn't respond to your next communication. Barrett felt his stomach tighten. Warning shots were serious business. Live weapons fired in international airspace. But they also represented significant escalation, one step below actually engaging the target. Barrett keyed his microphone for what might be the final communication attempt. Unidentified aircraft. This is United States Navy Flight Raptor 1. This is your final warning. You have 30 seconds to identify yourself and alter course, or we will take defensive action. This is not a drill. Respond immediately. His voice carried unmistakable authority and urgency. Every word precisely chosen to communicate both seriousness and genuine desire for peaceful resolution. In the L-39's cockpit, Claire felt the familiar weight of a moment balanced on violence's edge. She'd been in similar situations countless times. Aircraft loaded with weapons, pilots with orders to shoot, split seconds determining whether people lived or died. But this time was different. This time, she was targeted by systems she'd helped design, protocols she'd written, pilots she'd trained. She thought about the young man in the F-22 Barrett, whose evaluation report she'd signed, whose career she'd helped launch. He was doing everything exactly right, following procedures that prioritized both fleet protection and minimum necessary force. IT was time to end the charade. Claire reached for her microphone with the same steady hand that had guided aircraft through impossible missions. When she spoke, her voice carried calm authority that seemed to change the frequency of air itself. U.S. Liberty, this is Ghost Viper. I'm coming home. Disarm your weapons. The silence that followed was unlike anything any of them had experienced. It wasn't just absence of radio chatter. It was absence of everything. Every background noise, every routine communication across the fleet's network simply stopped. In the Combat Information Center, a coffee mug slipped from Petty Officer Martinez's fingers, shattering on deck with impossibly loud sound and sudden quiet. Radar operators froze at stations, hands hovering over keyboards, eyes locked on screens that had suddenly become secondary to the impossible thing they'd heard. Commander Harrison stood like a statue, mouth slightly open, brain struggling to process information that didn't fit any known category. Ghost Viper. He'd heard that call sign whispered in ready rooms, always with reverence reserved for legends that might not be entirely true. But Captain Chen's reaction was immediate and decisive. He reached for secure communication, connecting him to Admiral Robert Bennett, one of only a handful who knew exactly why Ghost Viper was approaching their position. Admiral, this is Captain Chen. Ghost Viper has just identified herself. 3-second pause, long enough for Bennett to process implications and formulate response. Captain Chen, immediately cease all defensive operations. Stand down all weapons. Ghost Viper operates under presidential authorization. Treat her approach as diplomatic visit from head of state. Chen had never heard Bennett speak with quite that combination of authority and relief. All units, this is Liberty Actual, Chen broadcast, immediately cease defensive operations. Stand down all weapons. All aircraft assume escort positions only. In Raptor 1's cockpit, Barrett felt like the world had shifted on its axis. Ghost Viper. The name hit like physical force, dragging up memories from flight school lectures that had always seemed more mythology than history. Raptor 2, did you copy that? Barrett asked, voice barely steady. I copied, Foster replied, her own voice tight with disbelief. Logan, Ghost Viper is supposed to be a legend, Barrett finished, someone who probably never existed. But even as he said it, Barrett was remembering details from advanced training. Maneuvers instructors attributed to a pilot they called the Ghost. Tactical innovations that revolutionized naval aviation. Stories about impossible missions flown by someone whose identity was classified beyond their clearance. Raptor flight. Assume honor guard formation around Ghost Viper, came Captain Chen's voice. Escort her safely to Liberty's approach pattern. Honor guard formation. Barrett had only done that twice, once for visiting foreign dignitary, once for Medal of Honor recipient. It was reserved for individuals whose service deserved highest possible military courtesy. Barrett keyed his microphone, addressing Claire directly. Ghost Viper, this is Raptor 1. It would be my honor to escort you home. Claire's response came with warmth that cut through years of isolation. Thank you, Raptor 1. Your intercept was textbook perfect. Whoever trained you should be proud. Barrett's throat constricted. Something familiar in her tone suggested she might know exactly who had trained him. Something that made him wonder if stories he dismissed as legend might be more true than he'd imagined. Word of Ghost Viper's return spread to the Liberty like electrical current. In Hangar Bay, maintenance crews stopped work to crane next toward approaching aircraft. In Galley, cooks abandoned stations to crowd around portholes. Throughout the ship, sailors shook awake shipmates who couldn't keep news to themselves. Chief Petty Officer Douglas Marcus, 22-year veteran, stood with younger sailors near flight deck edge, weather hands gripping safety rail. Chief, asked Seaman Rivera, who exactly is Ghost Viper? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, eyes tracking approaching formation. Son, Ghost Viper isn't just a pilot. She's the pilot. The one who wrote half the procedures we use daily. The one who proved impossible was just another word for not yet attempted. He paused, memories flooding back. I was at Lemoore when she was active. Watched her land in F/A-18 that took missile hit. No hydraulics, no electrical, half the tail gone. Book said that aircraft couldn't fly. She brought it aboard like training exercise. Claire's L-39 approached Liberty's landing pattern. The entire ship seemed to hold its breath. Flight deck personnel who conducted thousands of routine recoveries moved with unusual precision, understanding this landing would be anything but routine. Ghost Viper. This is Liberty LSO. Transmitted Lieutenant Commander Santos. Winds are 15 knots down the angle. Deck is clear. Call your ball. Claire's response came with easy professionalism. Ghost Viper, ball 3.2. Santos watched the small jet through optical equipment, noting smooth, controlled approach. No wasted movement, no corrections needed. Just steady progression of expert pilot bringing aircraft home. The L-39 touched down with barely a whisper, hook catching number 2 wire with surgical precision. As engines wound down and canopy opened, unprecedented crowd had gathered on flight deck. Officers and enlisted from every department stood in respectful formation, creating corridor from aircraft to island superstructure. Captain Chen personally descended from bridge, honor usually reserved for most distinguished visitors. Admiral Bennett's instructions had been clear. Ghost Viper was to be accorded full military honors despite civilian status. Claire removed flight helmet and stepped out with same calm demeanor she'd maintained throughout encounter. She was smaller than many expected. 5 feet 6 inches, lean build, graying hair and practical ponytail. But her eyes carried authority that had nothing to do with physical presence. Chen approached and rendered sharp salute. Commander Ramsey, welcome back aboard the Liberty. Claire returned salute with precision, speaking of muscle memory never forgotten. Thank you, Captain. It's good to be back. As Claire walked through corridor of personnel, she began recognizing faces, older now, bearing marks of promotions and experience, but familiar. Chief Marcus stepped forward. Ma'am Lamore, 2019. The night landing in 40-foot seas. Claire smiled for first time since boarding ship. Chief Marcus, you were plane captain on that F/A-18. Best pre-flight inspection I ever received. Simple acknowledgement sent ripple through gathered personnel. Here was legend who remembered not just dramatic moments, but people who'd made those moments possible. Before we get to briefings, she said, addressing gathered crowd, I want you all to know something. 4 or 5 years, I've been flying missions where backup was luxury we couldn't afford, where only certainty was that if things went wrong, no one would be coming to help. But every time I strapped into aircraft, I carried something with me. She paused, voice carrying clearly across flight deck. I carried knowledge that everything I'd learned, every skill I developed, every innovation I'd helped create, was being used by people like you to protect something worth protecting. You are what made every risk worth taking. You are what's worth coming home to. Applause that followed wasn't polite acknowledgement usually given visiting speakers. It was something deeper, recognition between professionals who understood weight of service and sacrifice. That evening, in Admiral Bennett's flag cabin, Claire finally got detailed briefing on current situation. Threat profile has evolved significantly. Bennett began, spreading classified photos across conference table. We're tracking 3 different nations that develop stealth technologies specifically to penetrate our defensive networks. Claire studied photographs with professional interest, aircraft designs she didn't recognize, radar signatures that seemed impossible. More troubling, our simulation suggests these aircraft could approach high-value assets undetected using flight profiles remarkably similar to ones you developed during Ghost Squadron. Claire looked up sharply. Ghost Squadron had been her most classified assignment, joint unit developing tactics for operating in denied airspace using modified civilian aircraft. Someone has been studying our methods, she said grimly, either through leaked intelligence or independent development. Bennett nodded, which is why we need Ghost Viper. We need someone who understands both sides, how to penetrate networks and defend against penetration. What's the scope? Claire asked. Complete evaluation of Pacific Fleet air defenses. You have unlimited access to all systems personnel, intelligence. Presidential finding gives you authority to conduct whatever tests necessary. Claire walked to cabin's porthole, looking out at vast Pacific that had been her operational area for so many years. What I showed you today wasn't the test, Admiral. That was just me saying hello. The actual test begins tomorrow night. 3 months later, Lieutenant Barrett, now squadron leader, keeps recording of that day's radio exchange. Not as keepsake, but as a reminder that assumptions can kill, and voices that matter most often don't sound like what you'd expect. They've implemented ghost protocols, systems recognizing digital signatures of operators who once flew in silence, ensuring architects of defenses are never locked out. The most impactful shift isn't hardware, it's mindset. They started Invisible Wings Day, annual observance for pilots whose legacies remain unspoken. Claire speaks at each ceremony, not about medals, but about weight of flying in space between protocol and necessity. When you step into that cockpit, she says, you're not just flying for today. You're becoming part of frequency that protects strangers long after your own wings are stored away. Because real leadership doesn't live in titles or rank. It lives in moments no one can forget. And sometimes, a single voice speaking through silence can quiet an entire fleet. Type Ghost, if you believe real authority lives not in noise but in silence. Because legends don't need proof. They carry their weight in silence. And the sky never forgets.